Why are you like this?
A rule of thumb for anything that gets absurdly popular out of nowhere is that along with attracting thousands or even millions of new fans across the globe, a similar or equal amount of criticism is due to follow. It's the nature of things when so many people have a barrage of differing opinions and ways to view things, and that has been especially true of a good number of indie productions in recent years. Whether it's video games or pilots for TV shows or fully fledged animated series produced entirely for people to view online, indie productions tend to draw a lot of eyes to themselves, for many reasons outside of their actual quality.
Do not put a sans joke in the video.
And that is especially true for the subject of today's video, the Amazing Digital Circus, an animated pilot created by YouTuber Gooseworks and Glitch Productions that has recently exploded in popularity, topping over 10 million views in just 4 days and already spawning a pretty large fan base, and has gotten an overall pretty positive critical reception. Now, I've been aware of the existence of this pilot for a while now, ever since it was first teased at the start of this year, and I'm pretty familiar with Goose's content, so I was definitely going to check it out whenever it was released. But even being aware of the anticipation people had leading up to the full thing being released, I've truly been taken aback by just how absurdly popular it's become in only a single week, and I'm really happy for everyone involved with the production of this pilot. And also my bank account. But even though this pilot has garnered a largely positive response from people and is already developing a pretty big fandom, there was something at the back of my mind thinking about all of the trouble that was going to ensue from how popular it became. It was almost like deja vu in a way. I can't really put my finger on it though. I think we should get to the point already. The reception to Digital Circus has raised a few red flags for me personally, and this isn't another video diving deep into the bad fandom or any of that tripe. It's a glitch show. It's gonna have a bad fandom no matter how hard the creator tries to wrangle it, which honestly, respect for the attempt. I mean, it was only earlier this year that Murder Drones fans were making fake screenshots of me making a negative Murder Drones review, so believe me when I say I'm not the least bit surprised that the fandom has already managed to land itself in hot water. No, this video concerns something else regarding the show's reputation, and it's something I've noticed a lot with plenty of indie projects that quickly pick up a lot of steam. Not just criticism, that's definitely justified in a number of areas, even if some of it definitely sucked so far, but I'm talking about people who really cave into the popular thing equals bad mentality, because Digital Circus might be the fastest I've ever seen an indie production develop a hatedom in quite some time. Whether it's people hating it because the fans are annoying, hating it based on purely arbitrary reasons, or just generally throwing around a lot of bad faith criticism or making up reasons to dislike it that don't hold up well under scrutiny. Of course, everyone is entitled to their own opinions, and I myself aren't as fond of the pilot as everyone else seems to be, but this kind of behavior is very interesting to look at, and it's only going to get worse as the months go on. So allow me to be the first one to talk about the hatedom for Digital Circus and why I think the whole thing is rather pathetic. Given my own thoughts on the pilot, because I know people are going to ask me for them at some point if I don't show them here, and to address the elephant in the room, yes, I will briefly mention the fandom, but I will also stress how it's really not that big of a deal. Yet. Hope we have all bases covered here, because I will not be wasting any more time. It's inevitable that whenever something reaches a high amount of popularity, there will be a small but loud minority who quickly develop their own minute form of counterculture against it. That's just how these things tend to work. Some people will always be willing to hate something if it's incredibly popular. But what I find interesting is that indie productions seem to generate these sub-communities of people faster than anything I've ever seen, and they themselves tend to be more passionately critical towards indie projects when compared to hatedoms for professionally produced TV shows or movies. Like, yes, some people hated Game of Thrones because it was popular, but tell me how often you saw people take shots at that show. You know, before it fell off a cliff. It seems to be a combination of indie shows being popular as well as strictly being popular on the internet, because when an indie production takes off online, it really takes off. 2014 to 2015, you couldn't turn a corner on Twitter, YouTube, Reddit, Tumblr, or anything without seeing some sort of post relating to FNAF or Undertale. Heck, both of those franchises are still absurdly popular to this day. But to use a more relevant example, let's look at Hazbin Hotel. Out of any indie animation product to come from YouTube, Hazbin Hotel is undoubtedly the most popular, and yes, the World fan inside of me is crying profusely, and from the end of 2019 and into 2020, it was almost impossible to escape it. The original pilot has 90 million views. It spawned the spin-off series Hell of a Boss, which regularly pulls in 10 to 20 million views per episode. The Addict music video has 155 million views, and suffice to say it has one of the largest online communities ever, as well as one of the largest number of people dedicated to shitting on it at every conceivable opportunity. And this isn't lumping in actual criticism, don't misunderstand. Hazbin Hotel and Hell of a Boss are incredibly flawed flawed as much as I enjoy them, even with the looming threat of an assassin weighing over me just for admitting that. But Hazbin Hotel got a lot of flack because it had a lot of issues despite being super popular, and a lot of people jumped on those problems and used it as the basis for their hatred of the show, which leads us back to Digital Circus. I definitely enjoyed the pilot, and I think the character animation is excellent even if it's mostly comprised of characters standing and talking to each other in an empty room. The premise, while overused, is still largely saved by some pretty entertaining execution, and while a lot of the dialogue is pretty expository, though it's a pilot so that's not much of a problem, and some of the jokes are just snide, Joss Whedon-ish observational comedy stuff, I still found it and the characters rather amusing at times. That is an incredibly simple but fair and level-headed take on the show which points out some obvious flaws but still praises the stuff that works. Do we agree on that? Yeah? Okay, good. So welcome to hell. While plenty of people have had completely fair critiques of the show, whether they liked it or not, there's been a lot of dumb discourse surrounding the show and the fact that it suddenly became really popular. From people unironically calling it the Garden of Bondman of YouTube animation not even 2 days after it released, people just making shit up about the show and how it was scientifically engineered to be popular based on Zoomer trends, people just blatantly making stuff up about the show in general by completely disregarding the execution and simplifying the show down to its most basic elements. You get the gist. Like a lot of people seem to be of the opinion that the series is another one in the line of haha, funny kids property, but it's actually scary or has sex jokes and is for adults, I think. You know, if you can describe anything Melissa McCarthy is in as adults.
God, are you alright?
I ruptured my hymen. Wow!
When nothing about the pilot is really all that scary, nor is it ever deceiving you about what it actually is. The tone is actually rather light and just has some light spooky mystery elements, and the monster itself is, oh god, I just finished talking about Pippi. It's nothing scarier than what you would find in a Disney cartoon, and it's never trying to pass itself off as anything more than that. It really does just come off as an attempt to lump the video into a pile it definitely does not belong to, because it's currently popular to hate that sort of adult content. I hate that sort of adult content, but Digital Circus doesn't fit that mold at all, nor is it really all that adult. There's also a surprising amount of people calling the pilot an industry plant and that it just suddenly came out of nowhere and became popular. One of these posts was from a Hazbin Hotel fan account, by the way, which is so indescribably funny given Amazon Prime just picked the series up. And that's not to say Hazbin is an industry plant either, it just makes it clear how stupid of an argument that is. Hazbin's pilot was made in the hopes that it would be picked up for a full series. That is the entire point of a pilot. And even then, Digital Circus is aiming to be an online series under Glitch Productions like Murder Drones is, which definitely begs the question of why I called it a pilot in the first place, but I'll stop being a dick now. And the whole thing about the series coming out of nowhere is laughably untrue because it was being promoted around the start of this year and the teasers themselves have millions of views. And Glitch were also producing merchandise for the series before it premiered. And when it comes to purely bad faith criticism directed at the show's actual quality instead of hitting it with ad hominems, the pilot briefly had a Letterboxd page that was taken down recently because Letterboxd don't like it when TV shows have pages on there, yet Hazbin still has one, never mind. And while I couldn't recover most of the reviews that were left there in time, I was genuinely shocked at how angry and scathing a lot of them were for seemingly no reason other than spite. Like, even if you dislike the pilot, I do not understand why so many of the reviews there were treating it like it was the worst thing to ever grace mankind, and it seemed eerily similar to the reviews that Hazbin Hotel received from Letterboxd, which when comparing the two really does feel unfair. This isn't a boo-hoo people dislike the show I'm going to die a virgin moment, but there was just so much anger and ferocity in these reviews and it honestly blows my mind. There was a lot of controversy surrounding Hazbin's release, which definitely contributed to the blowout around it, but Digital Circus just exists and is still receiving hatred of that sort of level. And I know I've said this a lot already, but valid criticism of the pilot shouldn't be dismissed and should be given so that when the full show releases, we can hope that some of it is taken to heart without completely tearing the entire structure down. But a lot of the hate for Digital Circus is just so obviously forced, and I think it's a fair assessment to say that it's only happening because A, it's popular, and B, because the fandom is already stirring trouble and people are creating a subsection of cringe culture for the show just because of that. So let's discuss the fandom, because Lord knows I can't end this video without mentioning it. Look, no one's surprised the show has a bad fandom already, can we just be real about that? Like, as much as I think people are insane for some of the conspiracies they're making about the show being designed to be popular, I definitely see what people are saying when they tell you the show just looks like it was destined to develop a bad fanbase, because it's a quirky indie production with slight horror elements, and any indie production like that tends to have some overlap between its fandoms. And I do understand why people tend to be apprehensive about certain properties just because of the notoriety of its fanbase, as much as I disagree with taking shots at the property itself over it. And even though I'll talk talk about why I don't think this is a huge deal just yet in a second, I can't deny that the Digital Circus fandom has not made the best first impression so far. Goose has made multiple posts already attempting to wrangle her new fans into shape, and honestly, even though it's an impossible task, I really wish more creators would at least acknowledge the wrongdoings of their fans, and at least trying to prevent the bad shit from happening, as opposed to either ignoring it entirely or just straight up enabling their behavior. Yes, unless you're spreading harmful stuff in your work, it's true that you are in no way responsible for the actions of thousands of people that you can't control if they choose to be incredibly stupid regarding something you've created. But showing that you're at least aware and that you care about this stuff goes an incredibly long way, and Goose seriously deserves massive props for doing that. It's a shame that it's going to end up being a futile effort, because as shown from her tweets, there have already been cases of people harassing others for simply disliking the show. And beyond that, there have been some other fascinating cases of the fandom being insanely out of pocket, like trying to insert themselves into Chris Chan discourse after Chris Chan returned to Twitter and YouTube this past week, and promoting these awful reaction images to use in response to someone who, Then there's a bunch of people being really annoying about certain characters in the show. I specifically recall Jax receiving a ton of stupid discourse because he's an asshole. Like, not because he's a bad character, people were just being incredibly overdramatic and getting angry that he was a douchebag when that's quite literally the point. And I love him. Your Honor, he is just a silly little guy. Also trying to pass off Jax as a poor attempt at creating a Tumblr sexy man when Kane is right there. And in general, the fandom has attracted a lot of people who are just incredibly annoying about it. This clip from Nux Taku's reaction video went viral because everyone is getting really tired of him being really weird about women existing.
Weird headset, and now I'm...
Did I recognize that voice actress? Hold up. Who voiced this character?
Who are you people?
And have they ever voice acted in something slightly more Rule 34?
Guys, the joke is I heard a woman in a cartoon and automatically thought of guys, you don't get it, I mentioned the funny website. And I definitely understand being annoyed by a lot of these people, and I can clearly see that with all this in mind, the fandom has not made the best first impression. At the same time though, I must stress that while the fandom isn't exactly great, it's only been a week so far. And frankly, even the worst of this fandom is tame compared to other shows that only got to the same level of notoriety from doing way worse things. I'd also like to mention there's 2 bait posts currently going around Twitter and TikTok that are headcanoning Jax as a predator, and also showing an versus AU for Digital Circus, and I must stress right now that if you cannot see that these are deliberate attempts at trolling to make the fandom look worse than it actually is, then you need to re-roll that perception check of yours. It's so obviously bait, and the posts themselves are hilarious, and instead of realizing that, people are already fear-mongering and spreading it around as proof that the fandom is already the worst thing known to man, which is only going to contribute to people hating the fandom and the show over it, because it's a perpetual cycle of negativity that keeps ramping up in intensity upon each loop. And people love to hate shows and especially indie productions when they garner an awful fan base, which is why I must stress that the fandom as it stands right now, only a week after the series premiered, is not a big deal. People aren't gonna listen to me anyway, but trust me, in 3 months time when the show is being irony posted and cringe cultured into oblivion over its fan base, I'm gonna sit back and laugh like a cracked up lemming, because this always happens. People can no longer spot obvious bait, and it's really sad, and objectively funny, but it's also sad. There's a reason that I've been apprehensive about ripping into the show's fan base like so many wanted me to, because there's barely anything here to get all uppity about, and really the main issue I see is people trying to make it out like it's the worst fandom ever in the world already, over tame as issues that are present in every fan base, and just believing obvious troll posts on TikTok. Like, for Christ's sakes, I've seen people use the fact that the series already has a lot of NSFW and R34 content as a reason for why the fan base sucks, and I've never really understood that. It happens with plenty of fandoms, and while yes, the ones regarding shows aimed at kids and ones that star kids are problematic, Digital Circus is not that, and all the characters are adults with confirmed ages. If people want to whack off to the show and draw some closely, then just let them. It's not hurting anyone, and I'd hardly call it a reason for why the fandom apparently sucks. Grow up and f*** off back to Reddit. But yeah, that's all I have to say about that. The fandom definitely hasn't made a good first impression, but let's not kid ourselves here. It really isn't that bad yet, and the people trying to make it out like it's way worse are the actual problem here. Overall, the Amazing Digital Circus has already had quite the fun week of discourse to look over, and it's raised several red flags for me regarding the show's future reception, and I just could not look the other way given how often this has happened to indie creations in the past. People are really over-exaggerating everything when it comes to this show, from annoyingly shoving it in people's faces as a masterpiece, to annoyingly declaring it's the worst thing in the world and writing up blatant conspiracies to justify their utter lack of a father figure, to annoyingly trying to pass off the fan base as one of the worst in existence not even a week after the show has been out because you stupidly believe some TikTok post from a literal who that posted it to get a laugh out of people like you going crazy over it. What matters above all else is that the series is going to be very successful. The views and critical reception don't lie. And this is great news for any indie project. People have to understand that a pilot is always going to be a rough version of what the overall idea for a show is. It's a proof of concept, and criticism should be given with that fact in mind. With the quality of this pilot already being pretty spectacular for an indie production despite its flaws, I have no doubt that the full product will be even better, and I can safely say I have watched at least one show from Glitch Productions. I'd say I'm sorry Murder Drones fans, but that would imply I had any interest in the show to begin with. But what do you mean SMG4 founded this company? What rock have I been living under? So even though I'm not as fond of the pilot as most people, I'm definitely going to stick around because I think there's a lot of potential here, and I think people should find a proper outlet for their rage over things being popular. Like a brick wall.